lube up the throat?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That sounds lubed.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of What the Trans.
What the Trans?
Delightful discordance. I am Ashley, and I have with me
Flint
and Alex. Hello.
Yeah, and we are here with something a little bit different this time. We are working on an extended project. You've probably seen the details of that in the description, but we'll come on to that properly in a little while. But firstly, just real quick, how are you both doing?
Doing chill. I'm doing all right. So what have I been doing recently? Oh God, I've been existing in a vacuum until I've come back on the podcast again. Fantastic. No. I have, I got Stim toys recently. So, that's it. You're going to get a little bit of an ASMR intro. I got one that's like a slidey clicker thing. It has the vibe of like flicking a Zippo or like a little slidey thing. Listen, you can't see it, but listen to this.
Okay.
That's fun. And then I've got these like tangly ones that like you can make little geometric shapes with, and it's like a tangle that you can sort of Tetris, and that sounds like this.
Yeah,
it's great, it's fun. And then I've got some like magnetic balls that are all different textures that I make into little shapes and dangles with. It's really fun to like make little mini pendulums with them, because different ones have different textures, and so they hold the magnetism better or not. And I've been enjoying. Yeah, Stim toys are just great. It's great. I did a spa day. Had my first ever spa day recently. That was nice.
Oh, really?
It was good. It was a good time. Relaxation.
Sounds lush.
Very needed. But yeah, that's what I've been up to. How are yous doing?
Well, the main thing is I went to a gig. I went to see my old band, St. Lucifer, for the first time since I had to stop being in St. Lucifer. And actually for their first playing in Manchester in like 2 years. So I went to Gulliver's to see them, and I had to climb some stairs to get there, and obviously come downstairs to go home. I find obviously stairs are just generally a problem, but going downstairs in particular I find really, really difficult. So I just went up there slightly dehydrated to make sure that I wouldn't have to leave to go to the toilet and then come back in again.
Makes sense.
But yeah, fucking great gig. The new bass player is wonderful. Like, he's a really fucking good player, and he was wearing a goddamn purple suit, right?
Oh, that's iconic.
Wow.
Oh
flashy.
Yeah, fucking hell yeah. And he looked great, and it was a fantastic gig. And I met one of my Coven's work colleagues. They were lovely. And and I didn't discover anything. They already existed, but there's a band called Hertzfall who were really, really cool. They had some nice, like, Joy Division, The Cure-ish type vibes. But also their lead singer was fine. Like, all three of us individually came to the conclusion, yeah, all right, he'd get it.
Valid, very fair.
If he played his cards right, he absolutely could. So that was fun when they were on stage. All three of us were just there like, oh, mama. So that's nice. That's not happened for a while. So yeah, fun times, lovely gig. How about you, Alex? What's new?
I think I've just been still doing a bit of a cooking and a bit of foray into baking again.
Absolutely. Good. What have you made?
Yeah, so for work, I've been cooking for my work colleagues recently. So I was just chatting with some colleagues. I was one of the directors who was just on the desk nearby who knew about my cooking, and I was like, "Oh, I'm in on Monday. What are you going to be cooking next?" And I was like, "Shit! Now I'm obligated to have something cooked."
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just on Sunday night, I made myself some gingerbread, stole some mixed spice and some other ingredients from my parents' house, very sneakily, and it went super successful. I also stole the recipe from my mum's recipe book as well, so the percentage of what's mine and what's my parents' is a big debate.
Normally it's a 50-50 split between the two, but With those
Nice.
no food poisoning this time? Everyone A-okay? We're all
Everyone
good?
was good.
Yeah?
No one's died to my knowledge.
Well, that's
Yet.
something.
That'll do. That.
A low mortality rate is always a success, but aside from the gingerbread being a bit soft, but I prefer a soft gingerbread.
No, it's fine. Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. It's
Yeah.
naff when it's all dry and cracky. That's naff because then it's really crumbly and you drop it in your tea and everything. So
Yeah.
fantastic, you see, and that's how you do a catch up. Nice and bish bash bosh, all done. Fantastic. Let's get on with it. So, let's talk about our favourite little thoroughfare, Action Alley. Just quickly this time. So basically, it's just a really short one, which is there are a number of letter writing campaigns to your MP, usually, specifically about stopping the EHRC guidance from becoming law on the nod, because if nobody submits a motion about it, it will just go straight through. So you need to write to your MP, encourage them to submit a motion and say, look, this can't be allowed to stand because it's really bad and here's why. And we will link to a lot of different letter writing campaign guides, like there's one that Transactual did, there's a few others, sort of guides and templates for if you want to get in touch with your MP about these things in particular, because unfortunately that's never not going to be important, right? And it sucks because your MP might be a bit useless, but it kind of feels like we have to try.
No, definitely, and it's been making an impact even with trying, and
Yeah.
and we've seen such of an AstroTurf movement with the turfs, but then they're never able to muster up the amount of people we have been able to do to push it forward, so every little helps.
Yeah, it is just one of those sort of like simple and kind of boring parts about advocating for stuff that is unfortunately kind of necessary. Like if as many people turned up to the protests as did the letter writing stuff, you would have more engagement between different things. It would be harder for MPs to ignore. I'm not saying that this is purely down to people not putting in effort, because that is a lie of individualism. But there's organisation on all fronts that's needed.
Diversity of tactics.
Yeah, if you're less able to get out to a protest or there's none near you recently, then why not do this, I say that as someone who always delays writing letters to MPs.
Oh,
and
for
things.
sure.
Like, I'm bordering on hypocrisy, so
Oh, for sure. Me too. It's taken me ages to submit one, particularly because my MP is Lucy Powell, and she's I'll come on to that in a second. I know what you're owing about.
Yeah.
Because she's kind of not responded to anything, any letters or emails that any of us, me and my trans friends who are also located within our constituency, of which there's quite a few of us, because, the city centre is perceived as being like safe because it's where the village is. So there's quite a few trans constituents, and who've written to her and not had the single bit of a reply, right? But she has now called for MPs to be given a vote on any of the changes on that guidance, right? On the EHRC guidance. And she's criticised Labour's handling of it, right? Specifically, she said that the guidance is not right. And that's just a short quote, obviously, but I'm impressed, actually. Lucy Powell is actually, clearly she's paying attention to something, to somebody. She feels really strongly that MPs should engage in a robust and transparent parliamentary conversation. So, yeah. And she vows, and this was the bit that really surprised me, she's vowed to support the trans community which I represent in my constituency.
Well,
I'm a woman, I'm a feminist, and I see absolutely no contradiction in being a woman and also supporting the trans community to feel included and to have their rights as well. So, and she's saying this as part of her campaign to be deputy leader of the party. So, in a sense, good luck to her. Maybe she's just kind of saying it for saying its sake, but it's actually like, oh, wow, holy crap, Lucy Powell actually said something.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I hope that is the beginning of a pattern that stays. You know what I mean? I don't want to immediately jump to cynicism and be like, okay, yeah, what's in it for you? That's But I hope that this is, as you say, hope it's not her just saying it for saying it. Hope that it's, putting her values on the line. I say on the line, like, you know what I mean? Putting your best foot forward. But proof's in the pudding. We'll see. Best of luck for that, yeah. Where are we heading off to?
We are staying in the UK because we don't have pond hopping this time. As Flint remarked before we started recording, yes, we're sure there have been some horrors from the US, but we've been working on something else this week, so we've eschewed pond hopping this time, and we're staying in the UK.
Yeah, grounded.
Yeah, our parents aren't letting us do the podcast after 9 o'clock or whatever.
Maybe.
All right. Okay. Well, let's just crack straight on. So we'll start with Keir Starmer's proposal for mandatory digital ID cards. Yeah. Riveting stuff. You'll have heard about this, right? Because there's been so much pushback and so many different people having made comment about this. I'd be surprised if you've not heard about this story, but yes, he's proposed to bring in a mandatory digital ID called the Brit Card. And while it's not directly a trans news story, the specifics of its implementation might have knock-on effects for trans people. Last time ID cards were proposed was under the Blair government, and although the project fell through when Labour lost power, clearly it's been something of a sore spot because the Tony Blair Institute has been lobbying for ID cards basically ever since. Like, I was looking at the news where he said, I should be the leader of Gaza. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Him saying,
I was like,
saying he
fuck
could be
off.
the leader. He could be the leader of Gaza. So I looked at that and I thought, oh, fuck off, Tony Blair. Piss off. Get a new hobby. And then the monkey's paw curled. And the next day, the news that he's been lobbying for ID cards had dropped. And it's like, oh man, that's not what I meant, dude. So, this new proposal just announced by Starmer comes by way of a group called Labour Together. And its authors, surprisingly enough, include a former member of the Tony Blair Institute. Plus, it leans into a bunch of polling data and stuff from the TBI. Now, we have opinions about the TBI, but that's kind of a rabbit hole all to itself. We'll come back to some of it a little bit later on. The idea behind the Brit Card is that by 2029, everyone in the UK will have to carry a virtual ID card in their phone. Theoretically, it would pull together info for visas, right to work and rent, and passport information. The headline feature is preventing illegal working, although it's unclear why a digital card is any better than existing right-to-work documentation or how it'll function if you don't have a smartphone. Here at What the Trans, though, we are worried about how the ID card might display sex and gender. If you had to present this ID to your landlord, your employer, or anyone else who's given the power to check it, could you then be outed as trans? And how would all this play out in a world where the EHRC encourages gender checks for access to single-sex services and bathrooms? Remember though, it's all very early stages. At present, there's not even a plan to put sex or gender on the card, and no mock-up images of the card have yet included a sex-gender field, although one mock-up has reminded us all that Keir Starmer's middle name is Rodney. Which, yeah... It's not great. And the nice thing about being trans is you get to choose your own middle name. And so I went with something cool.
Yeah, same.
Now, we do know, however, that Sex Matters will be, and indeed have been, lobbying on the issue. In fact, FOI requests from our old friends TAC show that Sex Matters have been lobbying on the subject of how IDs display sex in some form or another since at least 2024. Last time they pulled this shit, it was them trying to change the Data Use and Access Bill, but their ideas got chucked out because that bill was not about creating ID cards. The Sex Matters position is that nobody should be able to change their sex or gender on any documents ever because they are transphobes, and they justify this by saying that changing data makes it unreliable, despite the fact that people change their names and other details pretty often. What's actually on the card and who gets to check the card are things that'll largely be defined through consultations and stuff. Thankfully, there's quite a lot of people who are vocally opposed to ID cards on the basis of privacy and security. Arguably, there's more people against the idea now that Starmer's announced it. At time of writing, some 2.7 million signatures are on a petition telling the government not to make ID cards. We can always hope that the government drops the idea, but at the very least we can know that we are not the only ones who are opposing it. So, yeah, a few sort of moving pieces in this one, wasn't there? Because there was lots of pushback and lots of people pointing out, well, how would it work with this and how would it work with that? So what did you two think of this?
Yeah, digital ID cards, I feel like I would never, if I was a bartender or a shop, I would never really trust someone holding up a digital ID because it feels like it's easier to fake than just having a physical driver's license or passport, because there's probably a lot more safety features to confirm, yep, that's definitely a proper ID and isn't faked.
Yep.
I remember, I think digital ID or ID cards, not necessarily digital, but I remember ID cards being I think the first political discourse I remember being properly aware of. I remember as a young child, a really young child, hearing people talking about identity cards and stuff and being pretty against it at the time. And it was, just one of those odd things that as you're developing a consciousness, you're like, oh, this is a thing. Why is this a thing? Why is this important? Why is this bad? What's going on? And it's really weird to see it in the cycle again and to see Tony Blair in the cycle again. I'm not gonna lie, I thought this was a vampire we'd put a stake through the heart of by now, but hey ho.
Well, I think there was a Mark Thomas bit I saw about this where he suggested that people who are in favour of ID cards should have all of their curtains removed because those with nothing to hide have nothing to fear.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just bizarre seeing this back again. I have this horrible feeling in my stomach that the way in which the lay of the land has changed now is going to make it easier. I feel like these days at this point, we've had so many more encroachments into private life, into ability and honestly, fresh off of the back of the Online Safety Act, which I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, I'm not going to sit here and speculate wildly. I think that that has helped things, you know what I mean? It's helped make this conversation feel more reasonable, even though it's not. Don't like it, don't trust it, don't want it.
For sure. And I do just want to get slightly conspiratorial about this, right? Which I know I shouldn't, but I do want to point out that the Tony Blair Institute has got very close links with a company called Oracle, which is run by a billionaire named Larry Ellison.
Yeah.
Yeah, his whole thing, Oracle's whole thing, is about the use of data, right? And Oracle are kind of enmeshed with the Tony Blair Institute to a degree that's they're attending each other's briefings, they've got co-working documents. There is a whole person employed by the TBI whose job is to oversee the relationship with Oracle. So they're working very, very closely together. I think it's easy for a conspiratorially minded person, and I'm not saying I'm that, but I'm also not saying I'm not that, to suggest, well, is that why he's lobbying for an ID card now? Because then there's a vast tranche of English, UK-wide ID card data that he could flog to Oracle for however many $1 billion. And what would they then do with that data?
The thing is that the ways in which conspiracy as a concept have changed over the last, not even 20 years, 10 years, but especially sort of, over the last 20, has done a bit of a disservice when it comes to trying to actually understand where there are genuinely links that are problematic between groups and organizations and stuff like that. We've consistently come up against this wall of doing a journalism or researching into things and then pulling away from it with, oh great, if I say this out loud, it's going to sound conspiratorial. I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
But the thing is that there's a big difference between saying, I think there is a thing that might be happening here. I think there is a link that might be going on here. And saying people are deliberately, intentionally doing these things and it's all making these jump the shark leaps of logic that, is really about creating fictional straw men that are more comforting.
I think my version of a wild conspiracy theory is Starmer's a reform plant meant to get reform in power, but that's a wild conspiracy theory.
It's not even that wild. In Byline Times last month, there was Clive Lewis MP who wrote an article entitled, I think my party is paving the way for a reform government. So you say it's a wild conspiracy, but that's some literally published opinion by a Labour MP.
Yeah, I think that it's that thing of, does it need to be an intent rather than the noticing of an effect? It's plain to see that Labour is paving the way for reform. It doesn't really matter whether Keir Starmer is a reform plant or not, if that's what they're doing anyway.
Yeah, that's the result.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like we're all having fun here, but I suppose we're keeping things svelte, aren't we?
Sorry.
Just real quick, final thing I want to say about this. Obviously, depending on how the data is stored for these ID cards, it could, like the gender recognition certificate before it, inadvertently create a list of trans people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it depends if your gender is displayed on the card and how it's stored and blah, blah, blah. There's some possibility for unpleasantness there, isn't there? But it's all very up in the air. It's super early stages, so let's move on.
Indeed, something a bit more positive and less worrisome, a lot more happy.
Yeah.
Storming right in, just in time for us to talk about it, comes some very welcome news from Estonia, where things have changed for trans people astonishingly fast. 2 new legal changes were made, a new addition to the Public Health Act and a decree entitled Conditions and Procedure for Making a Decision on Gender Incongruence, both backdated to September 1st. This has brought in a raft of positive changes all at once, both legal and medical. Trans people no longer need what is called a ministerial directive in order to start HRT. It means that someone can potentially now start HRT after talking to an endocrinologist without any other hurdles in place. One appointment, bam, done, titty skittles. To correct a gender marker, previously trans people had to either be undergoing HRT or have a psych diagnosis. This is no longer necessary. The 2-year waiting period for changing a gender marker has also been taken away, which means that the appropriate medical expertise commission can immediately approve your right to change your gender marker after your very first clinic appointment. Obviously, there may be some resistance to all this change from recalcitrant doctors, but if this denial of care happens, Estonian trans people are encouraged to ask the physician to record the reason for their refusal on the medical record and then contact the Estonian Trans Alliance. Obviously, all this remains to be seen how it works in practice, but on the whole, this is outstanding news. Go Estonia!
Yeah!
You can't see, but I'm dancing.
That was great news.
Why is it more progressive than the UK, for fuck's sake?
I know.
Because we're in the heart of empire.
Turf Empire.
This is some really good news.
Yes, yeah.
And we got to take the positives where we can. Europe is tending in the right direction, even if the UK and America aren't. And yeah, lovely to see. And I read through this, was like, oh my god, that's amazing. You can get HRT really easily. Oh my god, that's amazing. You can change over your gender details legally really easily. This is fantastic. Why isn't there more like this?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, no notes. Speaking of good news.
Losers Corner.
Yeah, it's time for Losers Corner, folks. So buckle in, because we've got a twofer this time. We are starting off in Losers Corner's traditional stomping grounds first with a look at a legal decision. A law firm called Morrison Foster, which is referred to in court documents, I shit thee not, as MOFO. So Mofo had a trans man as a client, but ultimately reversed that decision and declined to take on his case. According to a Mofo inside source, this was because a partner in the US expressed some concern about the firm taking action on behalf of a trans person because of the Trump administration's hostility towards EDI cases. So much for zealous advocacy. Instead, we've got a scaredy cat solicitor. Fortunately, our old friends from the Good Law Project took up the case and helped the trans man take the Mofo firm to court. The legal claim sought damages of £25,000 and wanted Mofo to make an admission that they'd engaged in unlawful discrimination when they dropped the trans man's case. Now, Mofo did agree to pay the £25,000 and cover the claimant's legal costs, but without admitting any liability. Our winners this week accepted these terms, as it would have been costly to continue to try and get that admission of wrongdoing, and might not have covered the full cost for doing it even if it were to win in court. But in the open correspondence, Mofo did admit that, quote, the potentially controversial nature of issues raised by the litigation, unquote, had been amongst his reasons for not taking the man on as a client. When they were directly asked what was the potentially controversial about the issues raised by the litigation, Mofo's solicitors did not provide an answer. However, they stuck to their guns and said that the decision was, quote, in no way tainted by discrimination, and denied that it had, quote, anything to do with political events in the US. Now, if we were to be a court, we'd overrule that objection. It looks pretty obvious that what they're getting at there, even if they don't want to admit it.
Something about a duck.
A duck?
Yeah.
If it talks like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's most definitely a duck.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, that's just silliness, isn't it? But there is a juicier loser today, a juicier one. So,
Indeed.
do you want to hear about it? Do you want some juicy gossip from inside the SEGM? Because we know you do. But a quick catch up first, because acronyms are the devil's work when you have to remember as many of them as we do. So, they are the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine.
And you don't think the acronym's just a little clunky?
Oh no, it was quite catchy.
Which is, in classic manipulative fashion, a group whose main focus is to dismantle trans healthcare. Yes, they've been playing as many of the hits as they could fluff up enough to get past the eyes of people who still believe in respectability politics and will assume that a serious-sounding organisation will be operating in good faith. Anyway, the point is that they've been quoted by Trump's Department of Health and Human Services, which is DHHS, sorry for another acronym.
It was quite catchy.
And in legal cases going to the Supreme Court, they've also been quoted. They've pushed myths about detransition, they've pushed conversion abuse under the insidious exploratory therapy label, etc., etc. I will pause for your queasiness to pass. One of the stranger parts about them is that one of the biggest names attached to the SEGM is Gordon Guyatt. He's a guy who magazine Mother Jones has reported on as being, quote, the godfather of evidence-based medicine amongst friends and colleagues. And to be honest, that's not even an exaggeration. He developed the standard for assessing evidence of medical claims. The framework that he uses, called GRADE, is even used by the World Health Organization and a slew of other medical logs, which is just straight up confusing, right? Because, like, Brawl looks like he's throwing stones at a glass house, and when we say, like, this is poor science on the pod about some ridiculous doctor or medical board's decisions, we're usually referring to or thinking about some of his previous work without knowing. But despite this, he has spoken at SEGM's 2023 conference. He is co-author of their evidence reviews that were used by the DHHS to treat trans healthcare like a threat. So, I'm going to hold your hand and ask for a moment of trust, as we let you know that not only are SEGM the losers of this week, but the winner is sort of, and not totally, but kinda awkwardly Gordon Guyatt. Now wait, let me tell you something, hear me out, put down the Packards, I promise, I will explain, we are not turncoats, it's the guy Guyatt who is. What's happened is he and 4 colleagues at McMaster University, which I am sure is very well respected and prestigious, even if it does sound like it's run by Ronald McDonald, have penned a letter distancing themselves from SEGM, who they had a research agreement with between 2012 until 2024. The letter states in clear terms that their work was, quote, misrepresented and misinterpreted, stating, quote, it is profoundly misguided to cast healthcare based on low certainty evidence as bad care or as care driven by ideology and low certainty evidence as bad science. To top it off, they said that using the grade system of evidence review to justify banning healthcare treatments was, quote, a clear violation of principles of evidence-based shared decision-making. They go on to say they will no longer accept any funding from SEGM, and that when they initially made the 2021 agreement, the society appeared less threatening and more evidence-based. Now, we'll put a pin in the phrase law certainty for a second. In an interview with Mother Jones, he expanded on these points by saying it is an unconscionable use of our work to deny people gender-affirming care. And, quote, there are people who have real benefits. To deny it to people, to make people suffer unnecessarily, that's another type of harm. He also recalled saying, as far as I'm concerned, you are not evidence-based to some SEGM people recently. And, oof, that's the guy. Like, imagine being told by the guy that invented the centimetre that you're lying about your height. So, how did this happen? Well, apparently when he went to their 2023 conference, he knew little about them and spent a good amount of that time arguing with them about patient autonomy. And then he hadn't delved deeper after that. He wasn't fully aware of the level of involvement it had in the university and the way that they were using his reviews until the real winners of this week, which is the student activists at the university, began protesting and spreading the word. Legends. Not that I think any of you are likely to listen to this, but if you do, fucking mint job. You have done some amazing work there. Now, let's go back to the phrase law certainty, because that sounds fucked up, right? But this is actually at the heart of the misinterpretation and misrepresentation. Phrases like low quality or weak are used more as a comment on the methodology of the evidence and the strength of the evidence, not the quality of care patients receive or the level of positive impact on their life. Grade places the highest value on research that is randomized and with results that are measurable in objective methods. For example, a scan of brainwaves showing levels of cortisol is a better measure of stress than a therapist's notebook, but that doesn't mean we ditch therapy because scans exist. This means a double-blind trial where there is no one that's aware of what they're getting, if they're getting anything at all, is, as far as they're concerned, the best method. But obviously you cannot ethically put trans people in that position. There are many conditions that you wouldn't be able to test in that way. Evidence has to be collected through clinician observation when it comes to trans people. I can't put it simpler than Godot did himself. Quote, if you can't do the randomized trials, the evidence is always going to be law certainty. And here is where the real prejudice comes in, because of course that means there are hundreds of important parts of medical care that the grade system would consider low quality in the evidence-based area, but are seriously vital, such as cancer treatments, asthma treatments, and FDA-approved treatments of all kinds. But this argument is only being made against trans healthcare. Funny that. So anyway, now SCGM are demanding McMaster change its statement, and they are refusing. In the interview, he put it succinctly, putting out good science is not enough. I have a responsibility to how it gets used. He also disagreed with their response to the letter, and it's getting into a little bit of a tit for tat. You know, it's kind of like spotting two people that you don't like getting into an argument in a pub, and one of them undeniably just had the other's life, like, ate them up. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be friends now. I'm still going to side-eye you. You called those activists extremists when they were doing very normal standard protester things, like flyering and protests, but you still gave them the dues on giving you the nudge to get aware and make a move. So we'll do you this 1-star sticker, but they're going to get the gold medal. And that's it. How are we feeling about Loser's Corner?
Hell yeah, that was...
Well, that's... Yeah, fuck you, SCGM.
That was very, very punchy. I've never heard you rattle through a whole page and a bit of text so fast, Flint. Nice work. But yeah, reading about, because I sort of found this story in Mother Jones and thought, yes, this is Loser's Corner material. And so when I was reading through it, I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I wasn't aware that he was actually, chummy, matey with SEGM beforehand, but yeah, you're right. He definitely earns a couple of notches in credibility for his just masterful takedown of them, right?
Yeah.
For saying, you are not doing evidence-based,
Yeah.
Mwah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, Like, let's be clear, I don't think he's about to be donating every funds that he received from any SEGM thing to Trans Lifeline or anything, you know what I mean? Like, he called the activists extremists. He's doing this because it is what good science is, and he didn't want to have his name attached to bad science. It's still good that he did this, right? It's still good that he did this. It's still a very severe blow to SEGM that they are reeling from. But, like, I wouldn't start inviting him to a Pride anytime soon. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, right with you.
and I do think there is something to be said about how little research he seemed to have done before he spoke at their conference. That is actually something that I think you kind of do have to maybe be like, I didn't really follow necessarily perhaps the level of research that I would normally undertake on the everyday when it came to deciding who am I going to speak for. Like, because, I mean, sure, they made the agreement in 2021, but by 2023, like, that's late enough that I feel like they would have enough of a history for you to be like, oh, this looks like they're using things poorly. Hindsight, 2020, all of that.
You love to see it. I just love seeing SEGM and their ilk just getting taken apart by somebody knowledgeable. It's one of my favourite genres of news.
Definitely.
Speaking of people being taken apart,
Yes.
Ooh.
yes, we've got some very exciting meets this episode, indeed. We've been partnering with We Are Queer AF and Claire from Claire Trans Talks for some really interesting information.
Yes, indeed. So, for this episode and the next episode, and probably the one after that, we are going to be doing a deep dive into the gender identity clinics and their various failings and so on. All of which is data that's come from so many FOI requests that Claire Prosher from Claire Trans Talks has submitted and collated into this astonishing database. And so an analysis of which we will present to you now.
So, when you're looking to get a service from somewhere, you're not expecting a lot. You want to be able to access the service and for access to be fairly easy. And you want whatever it is you're applying for to be well run. So, for example, when you have an IT request, you don't want to wait 40 years on the phone waiting to speak to someone and to be tortured with that god-awful hold music. And you definitely don't want the technician to treat you like shit when you finally speak to someone. But when you go to the GIC, there are a lot of problems. And we have a bunch of data about that and how the GICs are run. And thanks to a series of in-depth freedom information requests, we are now working with Queer AF in a multi-part series to show you exactly what the state of play is, with how gender identity clinics are run and seeing what is going wrong and very occasionally talking about what is going right. And we will be speaking to the eponymous Claire Prosher from Claire Trans Talks, who put together all the FOI data and analysed it for us. In this episode, we're going to be going over all the main headline points about the various clinics, and then in later episodes, we'll go over some other topics, but we'll keep you in suspense about for now. So you can also find written articles about this all on Queer AF's website, which we'll link in the description. New articles every Saturday. So let's jump right into the data and utilise that seeing statistics that I got in my GCSEs. Well done, mate. We're going to split this into 4 different segments. The first being the referrals, waiting lists and waiting times, and then initial assessments and total appointments. Then we'll launch into the staffing and appointments per clinician and finally talk about the budgets. We know budgets doesn't sound super interesting on the face of it, but there's some quite illuminating stuff in there, so stay tuned.
Now, whenever anyone mentions GICs, the very first thing to always come up is about how bad the waiting lists are, how many years and how the 18-week target is as far away as Wes Streeting is from having any integrity. With the data we have, we found out a lot about how the UK has fared with dealing with the waiting lists, and can you have a guess how it's going? If you've not been under a rock, or indeed if you have been under a rock, you can probably hazard a guess, and it's not very well. As of the 31st of March, more than 48,000 people are waiting to be seen. Last year, it was 42,000. Now, some of you may have spotted an interview in The Independent where Wes Streeting was talking about how long trans people had to wait. Now, you would have thought he would have had the most up-to-date data fresh from his own department, but instead he quoted 42,000 people on the waiting list, a number which Claire put in a report last year. Which, if you think about it, does that mean he was using last year's numbers, and specifically was he using Claire's own data? Does that mean he doesn't know the full extent of how long the waiting list is? So, we asked Claire about this.
This is interesting because it kind of plays into stats and how stats are done. You know, you probably heard the expression, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And it is how you kind of view and see the data. And the figures we've got, this is actually all correct. It's more accurate to say that on average across the UK, for every one person seen, 4 people are added to the waiting list. And that's basically because it's an average of all of the clinics put together. So some clinics are better at seeing people than others. So they've got much higher rates of seeing people. So they have lower amount of people going onto the waiting list. Others, it's the other way around. They see very few people and most people go on the waiting list. So when you average all that out, each clinic is roughly sending about 4 people onto the waiting list for every person they have seen. So does that make sense? So it's a way of kind of measuring clinic performance as a whole across the entire UK. It's not reflective of the raw data. So the raw data is more a case of if everything was considered equal, what is the actual numbers being added to the total waiting list? And if we look at it in that regard, currently that's kind of sitting at, for every one person seen, there's 1.5 people being added to the overall waiting list, which is one of the reasons why it's growing so quickly. So one averages out clinic performance and is more of an indicator of clinic performance or lack thereof, whereas the other one is the actual true figure.
Got you. Okay. As we go along in this interview and with the project over the month of October, there will be more kind of specific questions about the data and about clinic performance. But at the moment, let's just stick with the pretty top level stuff. So last year, I think with Translucent, you showed that there were 42,000 people on the waiting list. But Wes Streeting said this year that there were 42,000. So his data seems to be at least a year out of date, right? So do you think he truly knows the extent of how bad the waiting list is?
Short answer is no. I actually think it's worse than that, personally speaking. I don't think he cares at how bad it is. I mean, with the data that we've got and everything we've put together, we've found that as of the 31st of March this year, there were more than 48,000 people on the waiting list. And a very quick count up that I did this morning shows that actually that's likely more than 50,000 people now. So we've broken the 50,000 barrier.
With the census, that's about a quarter of the population of trans people.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's about 1 in 8 if you combine non-binary people, like the whole population. 1 in 8 of the entire trans population roughly being on a waiting list is ridiculous. But if we come back to Streeting, effectively he's got all of the resources at the Department of Health and Social Care, and he's got all the contacts in the NHS England and the other NHS sources across the country, and he couldn't even be bothered to use those resources to find out what the actual current waiting list figure was. So instead, he used a figure that's a year old, which, ironically, the only place he could have got it was from my little Medium blog, where I actually covered up a small update from last year, because it's not been published really anywhere else.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's just, if he cared, and he was, I think he was going on about, it breaks his heart, etc., etc. It breaks his heart so much he couldn't even be bothered to find out what the real-time current latest data actually is.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I suppose an interesting thing is you've got Wes Streeting in your readership.
Yeah, which I thought was it's probably more like one of his staffers, but yeah.
So, with that, let's move on to the next statistic. In the last 12 months, over 6,000 people have been added to the wait list in a year. In our data, it was found that there were over 6,000 initial appointments made annually in the whole of the UK. That might seem like a good number at first glance, but then it is important to say that for every one person seen by a clinic, an average of 4 people are added to the waiting list. This is because some clinics are better at seeing people than others, so some have much higher rates than the average, and some have much lower rates. Basically, it's a way of measuring all clinics' performance across the UK while accounting for variations across all clinics. When we look at the raw data, the actual current stat is 1.5 people added to the overall waiting list for every one person seen at a first appointment. But they are most definitely not keeping up with the rate of demand. And when waiting lists are involved, there are 2 main sources for getting onto the list, either by being referred by your GP, or if you are transferring from another gender service like GIDS. There is a lot of complex information when it comes to this, too, and Claire explained it to us like this.
Okay, so let's just talk nomenclature just for a second. Just got a couple of quick questions to define some terms, okay?
Yep.
So what is a referral?
Right. Well, the easiest way, and the short answer is someone who's seeking to access a form of healthcare that is generally not something that's dealt with by a GP. So, for example, cancer care, you would refer to a cancer specialist. So, in our case, we want access to trans healthcare, so you refer to a gender specialist. So, it's something that's not dealt with by a GP.
The next question was, what is a transfer?
So, yeah, it kind of comes off of the back of referrals, actually. And effectively, a transfer is somebody who's already been referred into the system at a different point. So, and they're moving between clinics. So that could be somebody that's, say, moving from London to Sheffield and wants to move from one clinic to another. That could be somebody who's transferred between the GIDS or child and young person services into adult services. So basically, they're already in the system. So they're not technically a GP referral.
To kick things off, it looks like there are over 120 referrals a month, excluding transferals from other gender services, an increase of 10%, and it seems to be for one concerning reason. As it appears, the transfers from GIDS to the waiting lists for GICs have completely collapsed, in some clinics ceasing entirely. And according to some anecdotal reports, it seems trans young people are not being transferred to the adult services at all. In 2024, there were 1,379 transfers, but by 2025, that number has nearly flatlined down to 342. Forcing trans young people to have to get their GP to add them back onto the GIC waiting list, so they have to start the waiting process all over again.
It's absolutely horrid, and I think I've heard that a lot of it coincides with the CAS review as well.
Yes, because a lot of places just said, oh, well, we can't offer that healthcare anymore, so we're not going to do it. We're not going to do anything.
And, I think Claire had some ideas about what her thoughts on this as well.
First thing to note with this is, this was the first year that I actually asked for transfers data. So I asked for it historically as well, so we've got a bit of a picture. Again, it's one of these areas that I've come up with issues in getting the data, because a lot of the clinics don't actually record that information. Some of the clinics do record it, but don't record it in a way that's easily retrievable and accessible, i.e. not electronically. Some don't record it at all, so on and so forth. So we've only got a partial picture around transfers. And transfers are added in into both waiting list and referrals. So you've kind of got to move things around a little bit to kind of get a real kind of picture. But what we have seen is, especially as you've said, within the closure of the GID service, new services coming in, and the GICs, so this is people that are effectively aging out of the service and into the adult services. Across some of the clinics that were able to provide that data, I think it's the majority of them, that transfer rate has completely collapsed. They've gone from, there seemed to be a bit of a surge in 23, 24, and then it's just dropped off in some cases literally to zero. Now, I can't say exactly what has caused that, but anecdotally, personally, I think it's down to CAS. because we know that was one of the areas that Cass was targeting. I think another factor is basically just how badly the new child and young person services are spec'd, and how badly they're managed, and how a little help they actually have to offer. And then on top of all of that, we've also had the anecdotal reports of being kicked off of the service because they aged out, and then instead they've had to be re-referred back into adult services.
Right.
So I think the combination of all of those has seen part of the uptick in the referral rates for adult services this year, but also accounts for that collapse partially as well. But it's a much more complex picture that we've only kind of got partial data on. So
Right.
it's indicative more than kind of, we can't offer any real concrete, this is definitely what's happened. But it seems to be what's happened.
No, definitely. I think when I was reading I think with the Cass review, part of it was like the new clinics would then move people on to Cass's proposed 18 to 25 service, but because they're not there, for some reason they didn't think of having the initiative of moving them onto an adult service.
And the other thing I think we've got to bear in mind as well is, when we talk about people transferring from those young person services to adult services, we are literally only talking about people that are 17 and 18 years old.
Yeah.
So, they are either on the cusp of adulthood or have just turned into legal adults. So we're not talking about children here, in case somebody wants to misinterpret what we're saying. We are talking about effectively people who are adults.
To meet annual referral demand using the 500 service user limited model, the UK would require 33 plus clinics in total to offer that same level of performance as the service offered by, say, Indigo or TransPlus, an increase of 18 over the current number of clinics. This figure does not include the small number of current pilot services, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, let's move on to waiting times. Now, when we look at those rates of transfers and referrals, the waiting list size and the speed of initial appointments, it's a very strong cocktail of different causes that makes waiting times become unbelievably long.
We should probably put a content warning on this, as you may find the waiting times a bit distressing, so we'll get a timestamp of when we stop talking about the waiting times. Love you, Ambers.
57 minutes and 44 seconds.
At this point, UK-wide, the average waiting time to get an initial assessment is 25 years. I'm 24 years old. The waiting list is longer than my own fucking age. Now, there is a lot of small print to go with this, with big asterisks alongside it. The first one might be a surprise, because the average waiting time in England has actually improved. But let's not let them off lightly on this one. The waiting list is still a decade long, and it wasn't the traditional old guard doing the heavy lifting.
So just briefly to talk about Indigo. Indigo was briefly the pilot service in Manchester. It's now just a service in its own right. It's not a pilot service anymore. But Indigo was designed and staffed by trans people right from the start, including me. It got a couple of full-time clinicians, but there are also what's called care navigators, whose job it is to assist people through their interactions with the clinic. In the old system, people will wait years for their initial appointment with a clinician, but in Indigo, that first appointment is with a care navigator, saving time for the clinicians. Then, most of the actual care is given through primary care services with different GPs around Manchester, which allows it to blitz through its waiting list really quickly. It was a wonderful thing to be involved with, and I'm not going to witter on it for too long, but if everywhere worked like Indigo, the waiting lists would decrease significantly, because they've presumably uncorked a genie in a bottle for how to reduce your waiting list.
Like, that's one of the really, I think, important things before we get too bogged down into how bad this situation is and appears to be right now. There is a way through it. There really is a way through it.
There is.
It is not a case of we're stuck in this and we're in a ditch that there's no way of getting out of. We know exactly how we can get out of this. It could be a lot easier than it is. So just don't get bogged down on what it is right now, because clearly there are methods that could work that we could be accessing right now.
Going back to the other clinics, now this is where the numbers get stupid, and some could say horrifying, because outside of England, it might be easier to go from low to high in terms of numbers. In Wales, the waiting times are an impressive 2 years. But that's the best it's going to get, because in the north of Ireland, it has now reached 41 years of waiting. 41 years. And who'd have thought that was going to be the worst? But you ain't seen nothing yet, because in Scotland they have easily topped it with a whopping average of 58 fucking years. You'd be retired before you'd even hope of getting an initial appointment. Though, given how the retirement age keeps getting pushed older and older, that's if you'd even get a retirement. But let's focus on one specific clinic in Glasgow. The clinic we're referring to is Glasgow's Sandyford Clinic, as their number stands out compared to the rest. And the length of time you'd have to be waiting at that clinic to get an appointment would be 200 years. By the time you'd have waited 200 years, you may have just about reached retirement age. This is a number that's looking absolutely terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, no getting away from it.
Yeah, there are countries younger than that.
And just to say, the clinic in the north of Ireland has reached 41 years of waiting. That's how old I will be in a couple of months.
Alright, so that's a lot of years. So, just zooming in on Sandyford for a moment, we asked Claire about how things could have become so appalling at this one clinic, and she had this to say.
I'm not really well placed to say day to day kind of what's going on. I think our friends at Scottish Trends have got a much better idea of the kind of day to day issues being faced up in Scotland by trans people up in there trying to access services there. But what the data shows us is that actually the reason for this big jump in the last year is all down to, or appears to largely be down to, staffing issues at the Sandyford in Glasgow. And to break that down a little bit, back in 2023, they had almost 6 clinical staff. But last year, they had less than 2.5. And if you break that down to diagnostic level staffing, that's more than halved and isn't now even a single person working full time. It's not 0.9 of a whole person working full time. So, effectively, that means they've seen very, very few people. They only saw 18 new appointments last year. Effectively, everyone else out of that year's referrals, 580 odd people, went straight onto the waiting list. Now, that's not saying the clinician there that's left there isn't doing their job. Because actually, if you break it down a little bit further than that, I kind of feel quite sorry for them because they're working flat out. They're doing around 80 appointments a month on their own, and it's not even one person. So they can't literally physically do any more than they're already doing. But the questions are going to be asked, why has that staffing level collapsed so completely? And that, to my mind, that's a clinic management failure. That's a failure of the NHS in Scotland, and the Glasgow, I think it's Glasgow and North Clyde Clinic NHS Trust. So there's some serious questions to my mind that needs to be asked about why that was allowed to happen.
It's absolutely atrocious, really.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because it's that one clinic's jump on the waiting list time or waiting times that's caused and dragged everything else down.
You might be thinking, how was all this data collected and analysed? Which is absolutely a valid question. So before we go any further, let's clear a few things up about that and some difficulties Claire faced when putting all of this together.
It's been a bit of a journey, to say the least. I mean, first off, there's so many issues around this data. So, what I've kind of put together is effectively the best we can get, because the NHS's whole data quality standards in this area are frankly abysmal. There's no standardization across all of the clinics as to what data they collect, how they collect it, all of that kind of stuff. So not all the clinics collect the same data. Some do it in slightly different ways. So there's a lot of homogenization work that's got to go on to make sure that it's as compatible as possible. So that's a massive, massive amount of work. Just identifying and working out the kind of data that we needed was a big job in and of itself. It's like, do they have this? Let's ask this question. If they don't have that, can we phrase it a different way and see if they've got something else. A really good example of kind of both around standardization, data quality, and that kind of thing is referrals, which you think would be a really, really simple thing to do. But actually, it's not. Because ideally, in that kind of data, what we want to actually be looking at is not just the number of referrals that have come through, but the number that have been accepted, for example. However, there's a time delay that you can't quantify between when a referral is sent to the clinic and when they accept it. And you can't match the two up into the year that the referral was done. So you end up with two very, very different sets of figures that you can't match up into anything else. And they just don't relate to anything. So it's like, which one do you use? Which one's kind of the more beneficial? Which one fits better and gives you more of an indication? So it's all kind of very finger in the air kind of approach in some ways to kind of working out what works best and how we can get a most consistent picture. But it's only as accurate as the data that they can provide. And I think that's one of the big problems the clinics have had. And then on top of that, if that wasn't enough, there's constant chasing of the clinics because they won't adhere to the FOI timescales, not providing data, missing data, just generally messing about. You know, there's certain clinics that I've got, I would say, put it on my bad clinics list, say, which I know are going to give me problems every single year. And when you wrap all of that together, you know, what should be a let's get everything together in a couple of months actually takes about 4 or 5 months at a minimum to just kind of put together. And that's before you even start analysing it and working out kind of where are these things going, what are the key points you want to pull out of it and all of that. That's just the raw stuff. So, yeah, it's challenging to say the least.
And so, how many people are GIC seeing if their wait lists are still growing to combat these times? Well, to do that, let's see the stats on how many people are getting initial assessments. The chances of getting an appointment are definitely a mixed bag. On one hand, the amount of initial appointments this year has increased from 380 appointments a month to 545. That's an increase of 46% year on year. This number, again, might sound good, but in 2023 there were 422 appointments, which means that the clinics simply aren't providing enough appointments to make a dent in their ever-growing waiting list. They've been making up ground they've already lost, so to speak. So overall, it's still pretty shit. Now, we also need to mention that of that 165 appointment increase, 42% of those new appointments are from the 2 new pilot clinics, Indigo in Manchester and TransPlus in London. Tavistock accounts for a further 26% of the increase, with Nottingham and Edinburgh accounting for around 12% each. These new clinics are doing so much heavy lifting, and with them being newly added to this report, we can analyse and see how they're doing compared to the old clinics, who have a different approach to handling service users.
This year appears to be the first year you've managed to get the data to compare the pilot clinics to the traditional ones. And what sort of differences have you been seeing with the data?
Oh, now that is a really, really good question. The answer is really interesting, but it's also extremely complex. So I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can.
Okay.
So in short, what we're seeing now, you know, I suppose to bring people up to speed, we've had a number of new services introduced in pilot phase over the last few years. So we've got Indigo, we've got TransPlus, we've got the East of England service operating out of Nottingham. There's one up in Liverpool was called Sea Magic, and I believe is now called Transcend. And I believe there's one down in Surrey as well at the moment. So Transcend and the one in Surrey are still in pilot phase. East of England's data is merged into Nottingham's data, and they can't split that out. So we've never been able to kind of see how is East of England doing on its own. So this year is really the first year that we've had a decent picture of any pilot clinics that are now actually fully working as live clinics. So making that really, really clear. And what we're seeing in short is they're doing way more for less money, using less people than the traditional model clinics. That's the upshot of it. Now I can kind of break that down a little bit One of the things I did this year was actually try and kind of work out what are similarly sized clinics. So I kind of introduced something I call referral beds. So I'm basing it on referral beds. So if I look at, for example, the number of initial assessments that are done, right?
Hmm.
So if we look at those initial assessments for all the clinics that are around the same banding size as Indigo and as Trans Plus. So last year, Trans Plus did 694 initial assessments. Indigo did 522. So you can see reasonably similar there. They've referral rates are slightly different. The staffing rates are slightly different. In comparison, Exeter did 159, Newcastle did 146, and Northants did 123. 3 to 4 times as much as the traditional clinics. That's just on initial assessments. That's replicated when you look at total appointments. It's replicated when you look at the appointments per clinician. It gets really interesting when you start looking at clinical staffing and diagnostic staffing, because again, let's look at diagnostic staffing. Newcastle, who, bearing in mind, only did 146 initial assessments last year, have got 30, almost 13 and a half diagnostic staff. Indigo have got 3.5, and they did 4 times as much.
Doing more with less.
Doing way more with less. And the ultimate reason for that, and we see a similar picture with Trans Plus as well, although that that is kind of slightly different in a slightly different way. But what it boils down to is effectively what we've got now is what I'm going to call a two-tier trans healthcare system, because we've got the pilot clinics working on one service spec, and then we've got the traditional clinics still working on the old 2013 interim service spec, and never the twain shall meet. So because both Trans Plus and Indigo have effectively very different operating models that are much more streamlined, from what I can see around Indigo's, it's kind of much flatter as a management and diagnostic structure, for example. Their throughput of people and the amount of people they see has gone up massively. Yeah. I mean, we can delve into that kind of all day, but the crux of it is we can be coming back to the same answer: is they're basically doing way more with a lot less. And I mean, if we want to be really, especially kind of brutal with the traditional clinics, what we can basically say is that the traditional clinics are basically sucking up all the money and doing nothing with it.
Kinda, yeah.
Which, well, we're seeing that with the budget information, which we can kind of talk about and expand upon if you like it a bit later. But you look at the London clinic, that's got a budget of like 7 and a bit million. When you look at Indigo, it's got, I think it was Trans Plus, I think it was about 1.5 million.
7 times less.
Yeah, 7 times less, and yet Trans Plus are doing near comparable levels to what London are doing.
You have 7 different Trans Pluses to.
Yeah.
You could fund 7 more streamlined
clinics.
and
that's I think that's one of the things that frustrates me most about kind of looking at some of this data and seeing where it's going badly wrong. It's just the money is going to all of the wrong places and being used in all the wrong models, and it is literally just sucking that cash up. Inefficiency.
All right, so building off some of what you've just said, now and moving, like zooming out slightly from the pilot clinics to the picture on the whole of the gender clinic system, it kind of seems that the number of appointments per clinician has remained quite low.
Yes, and again, this is quite a complex one to kind of talk about and look at, because it's another one of these areas that this is kind of the best measure that we have at the moment. And I think it's one of the areas actually that I think just really kind of shocks me every single time I look at it. So, I kind of look at it and go, what the hell are they doing all day? Playing Minesweeper? Because the numbers are literally that low. In some cases, we've got clinicians doing less, doing one appointment a day. So, but it is more complex than that. Really, I suppose, first off, to kind of break it down a little bit, one of the first issues is that the vast majority of clinics can't even break down appointment types. So you can't marry up what appointments should be done by clinical staff, diagnostic staff, etc., etc. So that means we've got a much foggier picture. So we kind of had to lump everything in all together, which means it's indicative more than kind of absolute. Yeah. So my expectation would be if we could break that down, we'd see diagnostic clinicians' rates being up slightly higher and some being down slightly, that kind of stuff. But we don't have that granularity of data within the NHS data because they just don't collect it and they can't report on it. Now, that means it's a crude measure that doesn't accurately reflect what's going on as a whole, but it's the best we've got. That said, there's kind of 2 or 3 different aspects to it that we can kind of pull off of it. Now, as an example, Indigo did manage to break that data down, which I found was quite interesting. And they managed to break down their staffing to that kind of granular level as well for me. And what that basically showed was, because of their different model, is that their clinicians are working at what I would call maximum capacity, because all of the non-diagnostic stuff is being handled at a different staffing level, i.e. their care navigators and their admin staff, etc. So as I mentioned, I think in another point, is that their structure is much flatter and it's way more efficient. But it's a benchmark. Now, is that benchmark accurate? It's like, well, okay, how do we kind of determine that? I kind of worked it out from talking to a couple of clinicians, 2 or 3 clinicians and people working in the services, and effectively worked out the average length of an appointment plus the kind of the admin time that they would use to wrap up an appointment, I update notes, etc. So at bare minimum, what we should be saying is okay, at bare minimum, they should be doing at least 1 appointment a day. But with time constraints and updating notes and things like that, and allowing time for things such as continual professional development, meetings, etc., maximum of 3 a day. If you really wanted to push it and cut some of that stuff out, you could say 4, but let's call it 3 a day. So, three appointments a day, 5 days a week is, that's 15 appointments a week. 60 appointments a month. So that kind of gives us a baseline. And what we're kind of seeing is that actually so many of those clinicians aren't even meeting, as an average, aren't even meeting that whatsoever. And we've got it trended out. When we look at, I'm just looking at the UK level at this point in time on my dashboard. Now, back in 2019, the average number of appointments a clinician was doing every month was 44. In 2025, that's 28.
Literally almost halved.
It's halved, and yet when you look at the amount of staffing they've got, their staffing has basically doubled. So it's not hard to see where these things are failing. But as I said, it's a crude measure, but it gives us a jump-off point, and I think it's a jumping-off point for a much, much deeper conversation that the NHS and the gender services just simply don't want to have. Because I think if they do, it will reveal all sorts of other problems. One of which I think, which I haven't broken down in the dashboard, but I've kind of got in the background FOI data, is how many clinicians are working part-time, for example, which is going to have a massive impact. Because if you've got clinicians, say, working half a day, realistically, they're only going to get 1 appointment in, as opposed to 3 if they're working full-time.
Yeah.
So straight away, although they're working half a day, they're actually only doing a third of the job. Of maximum capacity. And bringing that back to Indigo, where we kind of broke things down, the Indigo clinicians, this is how much they're knocking it out of the park. When you look at the data for Indigo as the crude rough measure, and you think, 27, that's not too great, but it's kind of average. But you break it down to the actual diagnostic clinician level, they're doing like 80 appointments a month each. they are absolutely banging it out. You know, it's basically twice the level of the average in 2019. So you've really got to ask the question, is what the hell are the other clinicians doing in the traditional
No, definitely.
services? Because anecdotally, we know they're not seeing patients. The data is showing they're not seeing patients. I should be saying patients, actually, service users. I hate using the term patients. They use it all the time. But it's not, it's service users. So what are they doing? And the NHS aren't even asking that question. Management aren't asking that question. And that's one of the things I think really frustrates me about the whole thing that is kind of shown up is, yeah, we can see where the problems are. Is anybody doing anything about it? No.
Or even asking the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're not equipped. They've got this data and they don't use it.
There is also a question of how they are handling those appointments and what they prioritise. And Claire has dubbed a term for an approach they use for it, and it's called whack-a-mole. We asked Claire what she means by this.
You mentioned that some clinics are playing a game of whack-a-mole, and could you walk us through that interesting comparison?
Yeah, now, I mean, I'm going to caveat that a bit.
What, they're not chasing trans people with hammers, or?
Yeah, this is entirely anecdotal, but I've had this from multiple sources, right? And this is based on conversations that I've had with people that are working in services and some clinicians, but they won't go on record, for understandable reasons, given the state of the services. Now, basically, what clinics seem to be doing, or what some clinics seem to be doing, because obviously I can't say for all clinics, is they're making this constant choice in juggling who they see every single month. So they effectively go, how many staff have we got? How many people can we see? Do we see new people this month? Do we see people who are already in the system this month? Which side of it is growing faster than the other? Which one do we kind of need to squash? And they're trying to even out the service by literally bouncing from one area to another and effectively playing whack-a-mole to try and knock the humps down at the top of the service. So that's kind of what I talk about when we talk about, they're playing whack-a-mole. But let's be honest, it's not a good way to run a service. It's not an efficient way to run a service. As a staff member, that would infuriate me massively.
Oh, for sure.
So in some ways, I do, because there are some really, really good clinicians in these services. There's some not so good clinicians, but there are some really good clinicians. And the amount of stress that's going to put them under as well is going to actually impact the service as well. So, and again, that all comes back again to lack of demand planning, lack of forecasting, lack of staffing, lack of management. It's the same issues every single time.
In a way, you're surprised but not surprised. Like,
Yeah.
okay, fine, you get it. The kind of behind the scenes look is bad, but you're never really quite prepared for how bad.
Yes. Yeah, and I've kind of learned to kind of really switch off when I'm looking at it, because the second I kind of start thinking about this is people's lives we're talking about,
Yes.
it really becomes overwhelming. And it's one of the things why I did a basic update last year was because I was in a space I just couldn't cope with dealing with that level of effectively data overload that's affecting our community. I just mentally could not cope with it. I wasn't in the right space. So I only did a basic update last year. But this year I've done a much deeper dive because I've got a better tool to use in doing it and makes it easier to manage it as well. But I think it's one thing that does get lost in talking about all this stuff. We're talking data and numbers. But this is people's lives we're talking about.
Yeah. So, final question for now. Obviously, we'll be speaking to you again.
You're not done with us yet.
Yeah, quite. Or is it we are not
done.
done with you? We're working together. It's fine. Okay, so in a sense, I think related to the whack-a-mole approach, one of the other things that's kind of been drawn out of the data by, and I think this was an observation specifically by our friends at Queer AF. The data also seems to suggest that although the total appointments given to trans people is increasing, ostensibly, like you've got an appointment, etc., the actual number of appointments carried out is going down, right? So why do you think that might be?
Now that it first off, I mean, this is what I love about other people being able to kind of look at the data that I've done. Sometimes you get a bit too close to it. So even though you kind of get a little bit lost in the deeper analysis, and you sometimes don't see the bigger picture. So it's really useful to have other people cast their eyes over things and kind of go, oh, what about this bit? And I go, oh yeah, how did I miss that? Because it's so flipping obvious, it's untrue. So it's a brilliant observation, but there are quite a few things at play, and it's difficult again to say exactly what, because I think we're looking at multiple factors. So, and I think one of those, I mean, let's look at this one for example, is I don't have a full data set on this, but it is very suggestive, is treatment duration, because only certain clinics record treatment duration. Now, what I do know from the clinics that have done it, and most of those clinics are in England, is that treatment duration has increased massively over the last 7 years. So basically, 7 years ago, it was just over 2 years from start to finish that you would, first assessment to whatever endpoint, whether that be surgery or whatever, on average, it'd be just over 2 years before you're discharged from the service. Last year, that is now over 5 years. Now, the more people that you've got in the system at once, obviously, more appointments are going to them, less appointments are being available for other people. So that's one factor. But what's causing that? Why are treatment durations going up? Now, we've long suspected it's because of a bottleneck in surgical provision, because there isn't sufficient surgical provision.
Yeah.
Now, it's something I would love to deep dive in a little bit more on, but I don't have the time or the spoons at the moment.
Understood.
But we do know anecdotally that those waiting times have gone up. I mean, speaking on a personal basis, I had my surgical referrals done February last year. Apparently, my referral has only just been sent to the surgeon. So that's 18 months from assessment to it going to the surgeon. I still haven't heard from the surgeon yet. I've got no idea how long that's going to be, and no one can tell me. So we're talking to that point, and to surgery point, what, 3 years, 3.5 years, all in, once you've had surgery, depending on surgery type.
Yeah.
Certainly in my case, that's what it's looking like it's going to be. So that's one factor. People are in the system longer, taking up appointments because of a bottleneck. Now, interestingly, and it'll be interesting to see if they remove this from it, but I think I archived it. Newcastle's webpage actually directly references effectively a surgical bottleneck. So they know this bottleneck exists, and again, they're not doing anything about it. So that's kind of one factor. Then you've got to add in low clinician rates. We've got more clinicians than ever before, but they're doing basically half of what they did previously. That's another reason why total appointments have gone down. So while the pilot clinics' performance is brilliant, all of the traditional clinics seem to be slowing down. So they're acting like an anchor.
A millstone.
Which is a drag factor. Yeah. So overall, areas of the service seem to be improving, but other areas of the service are just declining massively because the traditional clinics are, for want of a better phrase, taking a foot off the gas. What are they? It comes back to what are they doing all day? So they've got more staff than ever before, but they're doing less than ever before. And they've got more budget than ever before. And yet, these pilot clinics, I call them pilot clinics, they're new clinics, they're literally carrying the service.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly frustrating. So you've got a bit of a toxic mess with kind of all of those. And I think those are kind of the three main factors. And again, and it's kind of banging the drum here on this, but ultimately, it's a failure of management. Nobody's managing the traditional services properly. And that is just my opinion, but that's what the data seems to be suggesting. There's no demand planning. There's no one monitoring the data that they're collecting. They're not looking at service approaches. They're not looking at amending service specs. They're literally sitting there going, we're going to see 500 odd people a year. That's it, regardless. And we're not going to do any more than that. So even though they're doubling the staff, they're still only seeing roughly the same amount of people. And you can kind of see it in the trending when you look at the wait list and referrals trending. Because although we've seen an uptick in initial appointments versus waiting list, we've seen a slight uptick in initial assessments. But most of that is basically accounted for, if not all of it, by the two new services. So we know that the other services some of the other services have declined. And when you look at it as a trend over the last 7 years, it effectively is still flat, even with the new services coming on stream. So this is what I kind of was talking about, as we seem to have a two-tier level now gender services. We've got the old clinics working on an old service model with no management. And I think this is another one of the things that really shines with the new clinics is the new clinics. And, I've chatted with people at the new clinics. They are actively managing those services. They are constantly looking at what they're doing, what their clinicians are doing, what their throughput is. They're doing it all the time. And it's obvious that they're doing it. But the old clinics just do not seem to care.
And now we will touch on this in a later episode.
Now, it turns out running these clinics costs money. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So, you'd think that with all these waiting lists going so large and catching up with it all, you'd need to increase your spending to keep up with it. But in this instance, it looks like the budget for gender services is essentially static in 2025. Now, there were some GICs that didn't provide any data either, but it could be argued regardless that in the past year under Labour, it seems any additional funding has essentially ceased. It's also noticeable that Scotland and Wales's budget has also took a big decrease in funding too. Not great for Scotland with the 58-year waiting list. But that's just this year. From 2021 to 2024, the funding went up from 13 million to 26 million in 2024. So their budget has literally doubled over the space of 3 years. And that's just budget allocation. However, clinics also break down how much money they spend on clinic and admin costs for their services. And despite that 100% increase, staffing funding has not increased substantially like the budget allocation has. Don't you think that's a little sus? If the money isn't going towards staff or admin or running the actual service, where is it going?
Great question, honestly.
Is it recruitment, or is it training, or is it like money going to management or funding consultants of dodgy sort of organisations who... Well, there's a whole load of conspiracy, as we've sort of been going through, of what it could be.
Yeah, like any answer that we could give or any ideas that we could put forth of where we think that's going would be just speculation kind of based on vibes and like what our opinions are. We don't have a thing going, this is where that money specifically goes to. And it's odd that you can't see a clear, palpable effect of like change. Like, if you'd have told me that they are receiving the same money that they were receiving 10 years ago, no inflation increases, and they were basically receiving less money each year, I would believe that quicker than this. Because this kind of just doesn't make sense. Which really means there is more information out there that we could do with that makes that picture make sense. It's just likely, like the pattern has been with this data set, going to be something that's more uncomfortable than what you first anticipated.
Yeah, it's not good, whatever. Like, and you just wonder, what are they doing with it all? Like, has the price of donuts increased specifically or whatever? I'm not suggesting that there's any kind of impropriety or embezzlement or whatever going on. It's just costs are spiraling, and it feels like no one's got oversight. No one's really paying attention to how the money is being used. Like
my first thought is perhaps it's just going towards... Like, my thought would be it would be eaten up by sort of mini admin costs of, like, it wouldn't surprise me if one or two people have gotten an insidiously large bonus. And it's one of those things where it might be all legal, but like, is it in any way ethical or moral? But then that is just me spitballing an idea based on how much I dislike capitalism. That's not based on any evidence. I don't want to put that idea out there as if I'm saying that with some knowledge that I do not have, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think a big theme of all this is sort of like the data that we get from these FOIs. Sometimes, I mean, the data they get is very incomplete, and like they only gave us admin costs and the staffing costs and then a budget. So the amount of data all these GICs are giving are just not transparent enough. And like seriously needs to be improved so that when we're looking at this, we know exactly what the image is, because this kind of mystery asks more questions.
So, as you might have sussed out, there is a lot more to discuss with the data we can see here. We are barely seeing the tip of the iceberg with what we can conclude from all of this information. Also, the important conversations you can have about the future of these services and how they should do better. And with all of the numbers and analysis on budgets, waiting lists, referrals, transfers, it can remove the personal element to the whole situation with these gender clinics in crisis, because these are real people's lives being affected here, and I'm sure, dear listener, I don't have to tell you about that. Sometimes it isn't just people's lives feeling like it's on hold, it can get much more serious than that. However, when it comes to conclusions and what needs to change, we have all of that to come in the next couple of episodes, and we have a bunch of other interesting topics to cover, so stick with us and we will spill the tea, sis. So yeah, end of part 1, essentially.
Yeah, lots of interesting tea that we're really excited to spill.
Yeah.
Well, we've been spilling the tea with Queer AF with their multi-part series. We just want to reiterate again because they'll be publishing one article every week for all of October. And at the time of release, there'll be one article on their website with another coming on Saturday the 11th. We've had a sneak preview of both these articles and they're really good. So go show them some love, and none of this would be possible without the FOI work and the analysis of the indomitable Claire Prosho, who you can find on social media as Claire Trans Talk, because this would not be possible without her at all.
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not.
Absolute legend of statistics. I mean, I remember the last time that we got a big data set from her, and it was amazing stuff, just seeing it all laid out. And this is even bigger, even better, even more in depth. Just one hell of a statistician. And amazing work by Queer AF. Obviously, it's interesting, but it's interesting because it's kind of so important. But at the same time, like, it's amazing that there is so much data out there that we're going to be able to basically have a feast throughout all of spooky season. And what's more horrifying than the horrors of health inequalities, my dears? Because I've also completely forgot to notice that it is spooky season. That's spooky season. I think that's going to be my trans joy for the day. Spooky season.
Yeah.
Gonna get on some Over the Garden Wall again. Gonna watch my little horror story per evening of the month. That's my little advent calendar.
Yeah, just one last final note. Just want to say thanks to James, my cis friend, who's been helping with me all with my maths and sort of breaking down the numbers. So, but now on to the Trans Joy.
Yeah,
let's do some Trans Joy.
And if you want to also share your trans joy with us, join our Discord. We have a whole channel dedicated to it. And every 2 weeks, we try to ask around to see what trans joy you've had in the past couple of weeks.
So Socks gives us the fit for celebrating 1 year post-op, and there's a tremendous photograph of them outside, topless, during the night, just arms in the air. Wonderful stuff. Fantastic. I'm glad you've reached that milestone, Socks.
Yeah, so next up, Erin Carlson. She went to work in the ISP industry and earlier this month attended her first BT wholesale partner event as the real her. They've attended events as themselves with the engineers that run the internet for a while, and they've been great, but this month was the first time that they've been with the people, and would have thought that it was the first time they'd been with these people, and they would have thought that this would have been mostly superficial, the sales, marketing and corporate types, and she needn't have worried. And as it all went amazing. Her outfit was on point. They stuck me in a front row where everyone could see me, and she had so many nice chats and was complimented at the social afterwards. And not only was they told that she looked great, but apparently smelled nice too. Onward.
Yeah, and Melissa is celebrating her 3rd anniversary as Melissa, and that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Melissa-versary.
Melissa-versary, yes.
Elora says, some of my friends came over for a belated birthday party, and one of them gave me a deer skull they painted. The bind rune on its forehead matches the one on my forearm tattoo, and there's a photograph of, a deer skull. It's been painted, and there is a rune, like a Nordic rune, drawn on the skull.
Yeah.
It looks cool as fuck. Like, it's like gothy as hell, but I love it.
I love it when my forearm tattoo matches my deer skull.
Yeah. Happens to the best of us. It's something that we can all admire.
George says, I have my top surgery consultant on Wednesday. Yes! Get it! Congratulations.
Yeah, hope it went well, because by the time we've seen this, that was last week. So fingers crossed that appointment went well for you, George. Congratulations.
And Min says, a bit of joy and a milestone for me. I'm in the lucky position that I no longer need breast forms that I used during the early part of my transition, which is amazing, and congratulations.
Yeah. Fabulous stuff. So Fushiko posted a very long and in-depth summation of how Final Fantasy 7 and 8 help them find their queer identity, and how it is lovely to see both of those games given like a remastering with all new, recorded dialogue, and it looks lush and pretty, these games that they've loved for so long. And I know, like, not for me personally, but for several of the people in my life, Final Fantasy VII was indeed a very helpful game back in the day. It kind of caused a number of shells to crack. So, Fushiko just talks about how it's wonderful that those games are getting some love. And yeah, fantastic. That's some joy from looking back, isn't there?
Nice. Congrats. I think we were just chatting about it earlier, weren't we?
We were. Yeah, that's because we saw it in the list here, and I thought, let's talk about that.
Your memory's better than mine. So next up, Charlie was able to find some organic tampons from the local eco shop, and unlike in most places, they weren't labelled as a feminine hygiene item. And that's always brilliant, and also, following on from that, they also said they managed to broach the topic of surgery with small people and is closer to making it happen.
Woo!
Woohoo! And Vilma says, me and 3 of my trans friends are opening a garage where we will be mechanics for cars and bikes, and we will flip cars and upload it to YouTube. As far as I know, we are the only fully trans garage in our city, if not the whole of Sweden. If things go as planned, we open this week. That's fucking awesome! Yes.
That is so cool,
That's
right?
so cool. That's so cool. Listen, if that happens, give us a bell. We'd love to talk about trans mechanics in fucking Sweden, I'm sure.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, we would.
Hell yeah.
Stuff just keeps happening.
Yeah. So many things. So Make It Rain says, in an attempt to cheer myself up, and has posted a couple of photographs, and has kind of joyfully said, I can't believe this is me now. And yeah, gender euphoria, baby.
Yeah, and further down also posted some photos of her with her kit of paintballing. Yeah, so like she's
Airsofting. It's BB guns.
BB guns, gotcha. And a bit further down there, she also posted some photos of her in her airsoft kits, and looked fantastic.
Look, and the comment on the photograph is also, I look cool as hell.
Yeah.
And yeah, like trans flags on the equipment, and looking like someone who's, on the front lines defending us from the Nazis.
I'm sure her competitors aren't that nasty.
No, I know, but as in it kind of the image, the photograph of someone who, holding a gun with a trans flag on their kit, it's just kind of looks pretty cool. It kind of looks like that rather than is that. And real quick, Alice Proper Nico says, I had a lovely walk with my trans friend.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Cute.
it's nice. It's lovely. You get some, take these little moments. They're really important. Fabulous. Well,
Yeah.
thank you all for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good time.
So, as we've said, we'll be back with more breakdowns from what we're calling the NHS files in a couple of weeks. And really check out that stuff from Queer AF, because that's going to be coming all through October. So, yeah, fabulous stuff. Thank you all for listening. Please tune back into us next time, and we'll speak to you then.
Bye!
This episode of What the Trans was produced and presented by Flint, Ashley and Alex, and written by Sammy, Flint, Ashley and Alex. It was edited by Amber Devereaux and Amber Roberts, with our opening theme music created by Warritsara Yui Karlberg. Our episode thumbnail artwork was created by Apoa Beers, and transcription performed by Sam Wyman, Rowan B, Rachel Aldred and Georgia Griffiths. We would especially like to thank our producer-level Patreons, who are Erin Carlson,
Flute Punk. Oh.
Oh. Flute Punk.
SAP.
Sabrina Artus,
Mika.
I'm a fawn, you dork.
Kellen York,
The Splund.
Tanya B.
Melissa Harker,
Tig Slater.
Willow_tree.
Katie Cox,
Levi Hart.
Zoe B.
Mikhail Jarjour,
Danielle Hardwick.
Ashane.
Mel,
Heather Patterson.
Toby.
Gorstar,
Susan K. Quinn.
Undead Nafa.
Bex the Mermaid,
Hazel Dust.
Laura, Queen of Seagulls.
oh, Becky Cheek,
Jordan Starr.
Lee Downs.
George Simmons,
Carly Silvers.
B Squared.
The Socialist Party of Great Britain, 1904,
Sarah.
Eris.
Tin Roof,
Maestrom.
Lex Phoenix.
I am not a political statement. This is a political statement. Chuck's Brick.
Oh, I hope we get a nice glass smashing sound.
A glass smashing
with
sound, yeah.
That one, yeah. Andrea Brooks.
Jack Edwards.
Dulcie,
Orion Matrix.
No Art.
Needles and Threads,
Flaming Daphne.
Dr. McGee.
Jen,
Casey Reynolds.
Georgia Holden Burnett.
Grabelicious,
Merxa Fon.
Root -1.
Gray,
Elizabeth Anderson.
Bernice Roust.
Ellen Meller,
Jem Hoskins.
Trowan.
Ashley,
Set Cab.
Jane.
Roberto De Prunk,
Rose Absolute.
Sarah.
Cena,
Kiki T.
D.
Sky Lane,
Eric Widman.
B.
Monsieur Squirrel,
Siobhan Fergus Evans.
Anubis a Jackal.
Brandon Craig,
Breakfast System.
Sean Phillips.
Heidi Reardon,
Lentil.
Clara Volume.
Samantha Raven,
Tabitha Joe Cox, aka Candy.
Murgatroyd.
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella.
Cindergoza.
Rebecca Prentice,
Dan Oblivion.
Helen _
L. Gray.
Nick Ross.
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard.
John.
Lara Bailey,
Ted Delphos.
Kai Lewin.
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user.
Vic Kelly.
Sabrina McVeigh,
Cassius Adair.
Melissa Brooks.
Karakan 12,
Oh, April Heller.
Sophie Lewis.
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott.
Oh, look at that. That's a familiar name. Oh, Ariadne Pena.
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean.
And Lena. Thank you all ever so
Thank you all.
much.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
listening.
Thank you for dealing with our droning on.